Oh my God, I'm in such awe of all of the production value of this show. Thank you for having me. You are single-handedly making being a Star Wars fan feel cool. Dare I say again. I don't want to say anything with again because of the connotations with he who shall not be named. But
Right.
yeah, this is so much fun. Thank you for having me here.
Well, I'm
Dude,
glad you're here hanging out with us.
Fantastic. Listen, you've been on with us before. We did an ATG regular podcast episode. You and I chatted for a while.
Yeah.
You've been a part of Podathon. You're one of our favorite people. I love YubNub. I preach the gospel of YubNub anytime I can. Retweeting. Greg's been such a great friend of the show. Jim is actually on either next week or the week after. So we're stacking y'all up. But anybody that may be watching tonight that doesn't know you, tell us a little bit about who Tim Barnes is, your connection to Star Wars. Just kind of give us the rundown.
Yeah. So my name is Tim Barnes, first of all. Everyone got that? Writing that down. And I'm a comedian, a TV writer, a podcast. I'm this new generation of really leaning into being a multi-hyphenate because that's what you have to do. Everything's a gig now. All of our jobs are just like cobbling together 50 gigs. Yeah. And I became a Star Wars fan when I grew up in Los Angeles, just a few blocks away from USC. And I became a Star Wars fan at the same time that I became enamored with this concept of George Lucas, who went to this school so close to me. And so it's all kind of like connected into all that stuff. And one of the first things I wanted to do was to be a filmmaker. So I, briefly went to some film school type things. And now here I am. This is where film school leads, everybody, being on this awesome podcast.
I don't know if that's the highest selling point, but we're going to take it. Yeah.
If you're looking for me to promote something, Maurice on Mars is the most recent thing that's out now. And that was an animated web series that I made for Comedy Central about a black man working on a coffee shop on the first Martian colony. And it was inspired by my own experience being a black man working at a Dunkin' Donuts while being a struggling comedian in Chicago, which is a Martian colony of sorts.
Certain parts of Chicago certainly
can be
thought of as such.
Having been born and raised in Central Illinois, I can confirm that parts of Chicago are very Mars-like.
And YubNub is just the three of us. We're all TV media makers, and we started it during the quarantine era of the pandemic as just a thing to do. And I like to think of us as a little podcast that could. We keep plugging along and having a good time together.
It's a great podcast, and like I said, I know you guys and have been connected with y'all in different ways. Greg and I got to hang out at Celebration in Anaheim a couple years ago, but part of, I think, what makes YubNub so special is you love Star Wars. In fact, you say, it's the podcast for Star Wars fans who actually love Star Wars. But you're also TV writers. You understand the craft. You understand, a lot of the Hollywood aspects of it. And so that gets into, being able to watch a show, whether it's Andor, whether it's Kenobi, whether it's ATGLive or whatever, and to be critical of it in a way that talks about the making of the thing. Talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a Star Wars fan, consume this media, but also understand how it's made.
Yeah, and I just want to say my favorite thing about us as a trio is that we all really, really love specific aspects of Star Wars. For me, it is like that feeling of watching the bonus features on the DVDs. That's my favorite part of Star Wars. To me, what makes Star Wars so fun is the fact that somehow a group of people got together and made this weird thing that I love. And the lore is great, but but more than the lore, I'm like, who is this author who got this task to write this thing, and how did they apply that? I hope I'm slowly getting towards the point of answering your question. I think that I am. What was the question? It was what's the secret sauce to our approach to talking about Star Wars? Is that kind of
just the idea of being a Star Wars fan? Yeah, that's it. Being a Star Wars fan, but also working in Hollywood and entertainment and TV and that kind of thing. Like, you kind of get a little bit of a backdoor to it, because we may watch Kenobi and, generally speaking, we know, there was a writer's room and there was a this, but how that process works. And so you may consume Star Wars even more differently than we do, as people who just have a dumb podcast that, we've had to separate ourselves to go, okay, I want to watch the new episode because I enjoy it, then I'll watch it a second time so I can comment on it on the show tomorrow. Like, you have more of an inside knowledge of how the sausage is made, as the kids say. Kids don't say that. We say that about
well, I think that inside knowledge is what allows us to give all of the shows a little bit more grace. And I think our approach is really sort of saying, you know, we're mostly just happy that we're getting Star Wars stuff. That's
Right.
that's really what it is. And we've all been in positions where, you know, we're trying to see the auteur element behind it all. We know what it feels like to have to work through all of the campaigning, all of the politics, all of the filters of notes. And so we're always rooting for whoever is like that true creative impulse behind these Star Wars projects, and trying to figure out, you know, how like what's the truth behind how this thing got made, and how can we tackle it. And if there's things that we don't like, we try to be very open about it. But ultimately, we're just saying, you know, the stuff that we like is because we just like it. We're not in the we try to avoid the what if of it all, which I think fandom, that can be the most exciting part of fandom sometimes. But we try to deal with, like, well, this is what we got. How did we get it? What do we think about it? And when we're mad about something, when we don't like something, we're not. There's no religiosity. There's no religious fervor.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Behind it. Yeah, exactly.
You know, I was doing the news story about Jodie Turner-Smith, and I saw you sitting there in the background, and I felt like you might have a comment on it. But and again, as somebody who creates content, and as you deal with, or as these shows deal with different levels of, there's some critiquing, and I use air quotes for critiquing in that case, where it's based on just this weird sort of aggression and hate, versus, you know, Nick and I are more than happy to talk about the things we don't like, and because it's sometimes as interesting to talk about where it might have missed for us, or where we might like to see more of. What do you think, and you don't have to use Disney as the example, but what does the studio do to manage, or should they step up and say something to deal with the toxicity, whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever?
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think with the latest Lord of the Rings series, I do think that they handled that pretty well from what I saw, and they didn't stop. There was no, you know, abrupt turn for season 2. If anything, I thought that they took the most constructive element of the criticism that they got from season 1 and applied that to season 2. Like I liked season 1 of the Rings of Power, and I like season 2 even better. And I love seeing that in people who create things. But yeah, what can Disney do? What can these companies do? I think there is this feeling that I get, and a lot of us are getting, as you know, we get this disturbing feeling that algorithms are replacing the human element. And as these companies get bigger, and they collide, and they have babies, and whatever's going on, that you start to get this sort of feeling, and it might not be the reality of it, but there's this feeling of a lack of the human touch, and a lack of the humanity, or this feeling that this project is going for the most. It's trying to reach so many eyeballs that whatever reason that a comment isn't made to rally behind an actor who's getting a lot of hate, it feels like it's tied to these larger concerns of, like, it's kind of like the Bud Light situation.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's the best way to put it. So, but I did feel like Star Wars itself. I recall a couple tweets that Star Wars, the brand, made during some of the backlash with the Acolyte. But ultimately, it's just so hard to tell, isn't it? Like, why aren't we getting that season 2 of Acolyte? What's going on here? You know,
it definitely feels like they didn't want to influence the algorithm. Like, that's the way I kind of look at it, is like, because algorithm is making so many of these decisions, and I hate to say it, like, and the problem is, and as a consumer of content, as somebody who looks, and I know Greg Iwinski would kill me if I called anything content. I understand, but let's just say series. But anything that's being produced, like I was going to watch Chaos. I guess that was Netflix. I was going to watch it. It was on my list, but now that I know it's been canceled, I'm kind of like less excited about it. And everybody I talk to is like, no, you still have to watch. I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to love it and I get more of it. And so it's a challenge. And I guess, I think it's a skill set that I'd like to see more of from the writers' rooms, of writing a series in such a way that if we don't get a second season, it's okay. If you do get a second season, it's a gift and an extension. And and I think it's just also very difficult for these companies to figure out how and when to engage in the uglier fan conversations, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the what makes me feel so sad about the state of what's happening with the Acolyte is that the Acolyte's intention was to reach like across the board. It felt it had everything for like, little kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers, adults, original Star Wars fans. It was going for that big tent energy, and I think when you compare that to something like Andor, which I love, Andor is such a niche specific thing. And I just don't know everyone that I know who even has what I would call, reasonable gripes with the Acolyte. They love the parts that they love so much. And again, it just feels it's scary that we're getting to this point where no one is looking at that glimmer of potential from the first season of a show and giving it that second chance to really skyrocket. It feels like. And the more that starts to disappear, the harder it is for a lot of creative people to get their legs in the industry. Their bearings.
It must be. I mean, as a writer yourself, do you find it? Does it impact you? Is it discouraging at all, or do you just have to kind of like be like, screw it, I got to do what I got to do?
It's discouraging a bit, but it's kind of hardened this feeling that I've had of just focus on the art of it. Focus on the part that you care about the most. Because what I love the most about Andor is that, when people tell me like, but it didn't get 1 billion views or something, I'm like, I don't care. It's such a great little gem that exists, and I don't know why I haven't purchased it on DVD, but it feels like something that'll be a treasured, physical object in my home. And I feel like that about a lot. Like I love a lot of Apple TV Plus shows. And I know that a lot of people aren't watching, these niche sci-fi things on there, but it makes it feel so much better for me as a human being who feels like this is a personal sort of discovery for me, and I'm just excited to tell a friend about it. And so the more that I focus on that, and I think the more that everyone focuses on that, the greater kind of stuff that we'll get. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. I think
it totally
therapy or something.
It tracks with that. And I have a comment and then I'll follow up for my next question. Talking about Apple TV Plus, I just finished Bad Monkey with Vince Vaughn today. It's great. Like, I want to preach the gospel of that show because it's very Vince Vaughn. He's quippy. He's exactly what you get in Old School and all these other things. But it's a detective show and it's set in the Keys and they're like, it's just good. And there's that thing where you're going, we don't hear about it because Apple TV Plus is not Netflix, is not Disney Plus, is not like there's a scale almost that falls in there. A couple weeks ago, my family, we've watched Ted Lasso, and several weeks ago, we were like, we should rewatch that. So we loaded up, found some other free trial of Apple TV Plus because we hadn't had it in a while. And when I loaded it up, like the automatic previews that start running, that's just like one after another. It's like 10 or 11 things, movies, shows, the Wolf show that Gordon from the Nolan Batman, what's his name?
I know what you're talking about. It's Slow Horses.
Slow Horses.
Fantastic.
And like all these things, the new Matt Damon, Brad Pitt, George Clooney movie, like all these things, like one after another. I'm going, look at all this stuff. Everything on here looks great. And I'm going, I don't have this platform. I'm not watching this, but I'm like, I now have 10 new things I want to watch. So that's one thing. And that speaks to what you're talking about with, a platform like that. My question for you is, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, if you expand the view out a little bit, looking at Star Wars, we haven't had a major movie, in the theater since Rise of Skywalker. We've leaned into this not only Star Wars TV, but we've leaned into streaming TV. And I'm not going to ask you any questions that may put you in jeopardy of like a future job or anything like that. But what we know about TV shows is we used to have pilots. We used to have something where we could test these things out and figure out what works, what doesn't. Is this going to become a series? And I feel like in this new streaming model, we've lost that. And so it's either we're going to make at least this one season. We've committed to paying for a full season of Acolyte that was budgeted at this. It went over to this. We don't have the ability to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't the same way the old network model does. As a writer, and I don't even know for sure what my question is, other than as a writer, the changes versus streaming and network, and these are different platforms and models. It doesn't work the same way. Where is the harm and the help in either one of those?
I think it can be very helpful for people who are younger than me. I'm like, I'm just getting to that age where it's like, I can only hustle so much, but I feel like it just feels like that sort of, it sounds like in a way you're talking about that lack of like their pilot season is no longer a thing anymore. And so there used to be a sort of cadence that you could have with pilot season. And now it feels like since everything is constantly going on, it's hard to navigate ultimately.
Sure.
So for me, what is helpful is just backing away, not getting caught up with, the excitement of all the millions of things popping up, and just having my own personal pilot season, trying to write one or two things a year, that kind of thing. And just focus on, whatever constellation kind of goes around my own gravitational pull there. But in terms of Star Wars, it does feel like you would think that with streaming, you could easily have some sort of, they do this a bit, but you could use something that's like, a what if type series just to like test out things. Yeah. And I actually really do respect what Disney has done in the streaming space with Star Wars. I think that we're going to look back at it as a very interesting experimental era for Star Wars, because it kind of got back to this feeling of American Zoetrope in a way, that sort of startup company that Coppola founded, where it was Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and a band of cool filmmakers getting together, and like, we have this truly a vague concept about a Mandalorian and a Baby Yoda, truly. And it was, that first season was very experimental with like a loose thread of like beginning, middle, and end throughout the episodes. But some of the best stuff was just like, he's trying to get Baby Yoda from here to there, and then something happens, and allowing these filmmakers to just like figure out how to use the volume and all this stuff is fantastic. And I think like, volume cinema is going to be something that we learn how to analyze and appreciate in a different way. The same way that like a lot of people now appreciate the aesthetic of the blue screen era of the prequel movies.
That's it.
So yeah, all that is kind of in there. I just hope that that there is like a stabilizing force at some point. It feels like the thing that is the biggest hindrance to me as an outsider looking in is the end of seasons that are longer than 7, 8, or 10 episodes. Like having a 20 episode season of something, having a standard time for the episodes. But slowly, I remember having to wake up at midnight or whatever to watch a new Mandalorian episode. Now they have, they start to have actual time slots. So little things are happening where it's
starting to feel like TV again. Yeah,
exactly. So they're slowly getting back there.
I can't. I don't understand. I wish I knew what has driven this sort of random short episode approach in an 8 episode. You do that in 12 to 16 episodes. that kind of makes sense, and it allows things to breathe. But I don't know. To me, I'm not in the industry as much, but it's a matter of there's got to be a reason why that's the direction they've gone. Because I mean, even like Agatha All Along, which has been just a blast to watch. I'm enjoying that show much more than I expected to. But this past week was 31 minutes. The week before it was like 46, and so it's just it's hard to like buckle in for each episode, right? Like Game of Thrones, okay, it's going to be between 55 and an hour and 10, and let's just do this, right? So
yeah. I love this question that popped up. Is it because of money? And we've talked about this quite a bit. Jim and I on it always sounds like you're saying the word Jim and I. Jim and I on YubNub about, let's say, whatever the budget was for the Acolyte. Do we really need all of the flashy special effects? If you were to be able to tell the Acolyte story in 15, 20 episodes, and we just have like 5 sets that we're going to, but it's just like really killer writing. I feel like we are at this space where the convergence of television and streaming and movies has become one look, one aesthetic. And we critique TV shows now by the standards that we once only critiqued movies in terms of like special effects and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, well, I'm down to have, less cool special effects if I get to hang out with my friends for longer. Like I
like that.
That's perfectly fine. So I think, it's just kind of untested how much money you could make if you make a longer season of a sci-fi show. And I feel the same way, honestly, about like what's happening with Star Trek. I've become a Star Trek fan lately, and I wish I had more episodes with my friends and all these shows.
Yeah,
cool.
There's so much to it, and I'd love to dig into this, and we may have to do this another week and get you back on and talk about just the nuts and bolts of it, because it fascinates me to no end. But I can't begin to talk about how much ground we have covered tonight, Tim. This is why we love you. This is why we like having you on. And we're going to get you out of here in a minute, because we promised you, a short window of time. We've taken a little bit extra of that. Before we get you out of here, what do you have going on? What do you want to plug? What do you want to tell you about? How can people find you? All that fun stuff.
Oh, yes. So you can find anything about me at timbarnescomedy.com. I've also got a newsletter that you can find at timbarnescomedy.substack.com. YubNub is gearing up for another season. We're part of this great Canadian network called the Sonar Network. And and in addition to YubNub, which you should all subscribe to and listen to, our first season with this network, which is kind of like the only season you can find right now, was all about the things that inspired George Lucas to create Star Wars. Hot George Summer, yes, and all the things that he created leading up to the first Star Wars movie. So we talked about his short films at USC. We talked about all of his creative influences. And but in addition to that, I also host a podcast called You Are the Genre, which is just an interview series with people who write movies, who write TV, who write books. And here's a guest that I would love for you guys to get, and I guess for YubNub as well. My most recent guest was Tanana Reeve-Du. She's a great horror writer, and she has this podcast called the Life Writing Podcast that she co-hosts with her husband, Stephen Barnes, who is of no relation to me, but Stephen just released a Mace Windu book that I cannot wait to read.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just ranting at this point, but that's all the stuff about me. How about you?
Well, I'm going to say this. I'm going to encourage also timbarnescomedy.com. Is that right? timbarnescomedy.com. Yeah. You can sign up. You've got newsletters. You've got Substacks. You've got all that stuff. Letters from African America. 5 jokes. I have that. It shows up in my inbox. They make me laugh every time. It's 100% worth your time. Tim is a brilliant writer and one of our favorite people. So thank you so much for being on with us tonight. We will definitely have you back again sometime soon, because we love to do this. Just hang out, laugh, and talk about Star Wars.
Thank you for having me. I believe in you all.
Well, Tim,
awesome.
If you believe in us, then we can make it through yet another day. Appreciate it. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Tim. We'll catch you next time, buddy.
Bye.